I never thought I'd be the person sitting in a cramped, open-plan office in Manchester, holding an envelope stuffed with other people's money, wondering whether handing it over would make me compassionate or unbelievably stupid. How do you look at a whole team of kind, decent coworkers and tell them the woman we were all trying to help might not actually need rescuing? And worse, what if I was wrong? And I was the one about to wreck someone's reputation over a suspicion I couldn't even prove. It started so simply that now, looking back on it, the whole thing feels almost embarrassing. I'm 26, and I work in a small admin office where everybody more or less knows everybody else's business. It's one of those places where people bring in homemade flapjacks on Fridays, where nobody ever forgets a birthday, and where if someone looks a little pale, 3 people will ask whether they should go home early. It's warm, familiar, comfortable, safe even, or at least, that's what I thought it was. A couple of weeks ago, one of my coworkers, let's call her Chloe, started mentioning that she was having money trouble. She didn't make a scene of it. No tears, no dramatic speeches, no fishing for sympathy. Just quiet little comments here and there. She said she'd had some unexpected health issues, a few appointments and private prescriptions she hadn't planned for, bills building up, and that she wasn't sure she was going to be able to cover her rent that month. I remember exactly where I was when she said it. We were in the staff kitchen, and one of the fluorescent lights overhead kept flickering every few seconds, casting everything in that tired, washed-out glow that makes a workplace feel even more exhausted than it already is. She was stirring her tea, not really looking at any of us, just speaking into the room as though she wasn't certain she wanted anyone to hear. Something about that moment got to me. Maybe it was the way her voice dipped at the end, as if even saying the words out loud cost her something. Maybe it was the silence afterwards, thick and awkward, the kind where nobody knows what to say because anything they say might sound clumsy or patronizing. Or maybe it was simply that I saw too much of myself in her, because if I'm being honest, I'm not exactly miles away from the same situation if life decided to catch me off guard. So I did what I usually do. I stepped in. I suggested we do a small collection for her. Nothing public, nothing over the top. Just something within the office. People putting in whatever they could spare to help her get through the month. It felt like the decent thing to do. The sort of thing that makes you feel like people are still fundamentally good. And everyone agreed almost straight away. That's the thing about our office. People don't hesitate when somebody needs help. Within a day, I had messages coming in from coworkers asking how they could contribute. Some put in a few pounds, some put in a lot more. Nobody asked awkward questions. Nobody seemed doubtful. Nobody looked at her story and tried to pick holes in it. And somehow, without really noticing how it happened, I became the one in charge of it all. I organized the contributions. I kept track of what had come in and from whom. I even added some of my own money, more than I should have if I'm being honest with myself. But at the time it didn't feel reckless. It felt worthwhile, meaningful. Like all of us were taking part in something genuinely kind. When I counted it up, the total surprised me. It wasn't just a token amount. It was enough to make a real difference. Enough to cover rent. Enough to give her breathing room. Enough that if she really was in trouble, it could pull her back from the edge for a month. I remember sitting at my desk, staring at the number on my monitor, feeling this odd blend of pride and relief. We did this, I thought. We actually managed to help someone. So naturally, the next step was to give her the money. But something changed. I messaged Chloe to ask how she'd like to receive it. Cash? Bank transfer? I wanted to make it easy for her, comfortable. It was her situation after all. Her reply came later than I expected, and when it did, it was strange. She said she'd have a think and get back to me. That was all. No thank you. No urgency. No hint of relief. Not even that awkward kind of gratitude people usually show when they're embarrassed to accept help. Just hesitation. At first I told myself I was reading too much into it. People react differently when they're under pressure, don't they? Maybe she felt ashamed. Maybe she hated the idea of accepting money from colleagues. Maybe. But even while I was trying to explain it away, I could feel something in my chest tightening. Because if I were in her place, I wouldn't have needed time to think. I'd have been desperate. The next day, I tried to ignore it. I went through my usual routine, answered emails, sat through meetings, laughed at jokes that weren't especially funny. But her message kept replaying in my mind. I'll have a think. Why would you need to think about accepting help if you were genuinely about to lose your flat? That question clung to me for longer than I wanted to admit. And then everything started to unravel. It was at lunch when another coworker, someone I trust, someone who isn't the type to stir drama for entertainment, pulled me aside. The kind of quiet, "Can I talk to you for a sec?" that makes your stomach sink before the conversation has even started. We moved into a quieter corner near the back corridor, away from everyone else. And then she said something that made my heart drop. She told me that Chloe had apparently been talking casually, even excitedly, about planning a holiday. Not just a weekend away, a proper trip. And the timing, according to what she'd heard, lined up almost exactly with when Chloe claimed she couldn't afford rent. I remember blinking at her, trying to process it properly. "A holiday?" I asked, like maybe I'd misunderstood. She nodded, her mouth tight. "Yeah, she's mentioned it more than once. I didn't really think anything of it at first, but after the collection, it started to feel odd." We stood there in silence for a moment, and I swear I could feel something inside me shift. Not break, not yet, but split slightly. Because all at once, those little details I'd been trying to dismiss didn't seem little anymore. The hesitation, the lack of urgency, the vague tone. I didn't want to believe it. God, I really didn't. So I forced myself to come up with alternatives. Maybe she'd booked the trip ages ago. Maybe it was non-refundable. Maybe she was clinging to one good thing while the rest of her life felt like it was falling apart. So later that afternoon, I did something I hated. I tested her. Not directly, not aggressively, just gently. I brought up her situation again and asked how things were going, whether she'd managed to work anything out. And the way she answered, it didn't sit right. Her words were vague. Her tone felt rehearsed. It was like she was giving me the sort of answer she thought I wanted to hear, rather than telling me the truth. And in that moment, I felt it, that heavy, sinking feeling in my stomach, the kind that tells you something is wrong even when you don't want it to be. So I made a decision, and even as I made it, I knew it was going to cause trouble. I didn't give her the money. Instead, I told the group that before handing it over, I wanted to make sure everything was clear. I didn't accuse her. I didn't expose anything. I just paused. And that was when everything exploded. The moment I said I was holding on to the money a little longer, I felt the whole atmosphere around me change, as if I'd quietly stepped out of line in a place where people almost never do. At first, it was subtle, a few puzzled looks. A couple of messages in the group chat asking, "What do you mean?" Nothing openly hostile, just tension. The sort that creeps in slowly, like a draft finding its way under a door before you even realize the room has gone cold. I tried to keep it simple. I told them I just wanted to make sure everything was clear before passing the money on. That it was a significant amount, and because it wasn't just mine, I felt responsible for making sure it was going to the right place for the right reason. Even as I typed it, I could feel my fingers hesitating over the keyboard because I knew how it sounded. Careful. Measured. Suspicious. And that wasn't who I wanted to be. But by then, it was already too late. The replies started coming in. Some people seemed understanding, at least on the surface. They said things like, "Fair enough, it is a lot of money," or "Better to be careful, I suppose." But even in those messages, I could feel a certain distance, like they weren't exactly with me, just not ready to challenge me yet. And then there were the others, the ones who didn't bother hiding what they thought. One colleague messaged me privately, "Isn't this a bit much? We'd already agreed it was for her." Another wrote, "It kind of seems like you don't trust her." That one hit harder than I expected, because they weren't wrong. I didn't. Not anymore. And that realization settled in my chest like a stone. I kept replaying everything in my mind, over and over, as if somewhere in the repetition I'd find a version of events where it all made sense again. A version where Chloe was exactly who I thought she was, where I'd misunderstood something, where this whole thing could still shrink back down into a harmless misunderstanding. But every time I went over it, I came back to the same place. Something was off, and I couldn't ignore it. The next day, things got worse. Chloe came straight up to me. I remember seeing her walking towards my desk and feeling my stomach tighten immediately. There was something different about her, in the way she carried herself, in her expression. She wasn't quiet anymore. She looked hurt, or at least, she wore hurt well.
"Hey," she said, her voice controlled but strained.
"Can we talk?" I nodded, though my throat had already gone dry. We went into one of the little meeting rooms. The door clicked shut behind us, and suddenly every sound felt louder. My heartbeat, my breathing, the silence hanging between us. She didn't sit. She just looked at me. "I heard you're not giving me the money," she said. Not as a question, as a fact.
I swallowed.
"I didn't say that. I just said I wanted to clarify a few things first."
Her brows drew together. Clarify what?
There it was, the moment I'd been trying to avoid. I could have backed down right then. I could have laughed it off, apologized, handed the envelope over, and pretended none of this had happened. That would have been easier. But something in me wouldn't let me. "I just want to understand your situation properly," I said carefully. "That's all." Her face changed instantly, like a switch being flicked. "What exactly does that mean?" she asked, sharper now. I hesitated, and that hesitation said more than any sentence I could have come up with.
Her eyes widened a fraction. "Do you think I'm lying?"
The question hung there between us, heavy, unavoidable. I opened my mouth, but for a second nothing came out. Because the truth was, I didn't fully know what I thought anymore.
"I'm not saying that," I said at last. "I just think, because this is everyone's money, we should be certain."
She let out a short, bitter laugh. Wow. Just that one word, and somehow it felt like a slap. "I told you what I'm dealing with," she said, her voice lifting slightly. "And instead of helping, you're interrogating me?" "I'm not interrogating you. That's exactly what this is." She took a step back and shook her head. "I can't believe this. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? Everyone already knows about my situation, and now you're making it worse." Her words landed harder than I expected. "Because this This was exactly what I'd been afraid of, that I wasn't just being careful. I was hurting her.
I didn't mean to embarrass you, I said quietly. That isn't what this is about.
Then what is it about? She shot back. I hesitated again. And in that moment, I realized something. There was no version of this conversation where I came out looking like the decent one. Either I trusted her completely and risked being taken for a fool, or I questioned her and became the villain. There wasn't any middle ground. I heard something, I said finally.
Her eyes narrowed. What?
I exhaled slowly.
That you might be planning a holiday.
The silence that followed was deafening. For a second, she simply stared at me, and then her expression changed again. Not hurt this time. Not even anger. Something else. Something cooler. So that's what this is, she said. I'm just asking. You're listening to rumors. I'm trying to understand. You're judging me. Her voice had gone steadier now, but there was a hard edge underneath it that made my chest tighten. I trusted you, she said. I told you something personal, and instead of helping me, you went behind my back and decided I'm some kind of liar.
I didn't decide anything, I said, though even as the words left my mouth, I knew that wasn't entirely true.
She shook her head again, slower this time. You know what? She said. Keep the money. That caught me off guard. What? I don't want it anymore. The words hit like a punch to the ribs. Chloe.
No, she said, cutting me off. You've made it very clear what you think of me.
That's not.
I'm not going to beg for help, she said firmly, especially not from someone who clearly doesn't respect me.
And just like that, she turned and walked out. The door shut behind her with a soft click, but it might as well have been a slam. I stood there for a long time after she left, just standing, trying to understand what had just happened, because this wasn't how it was meant to go. I thought I was being responsible. I thought I was doing the right thing. So why did it feel like I'd crossed a line I could never uncross? And worse, why did part of me still believe I wasn't wrong? After she walked out, I didn't move for ages. I just stood there, in that tiny meeting room, staring at the door, as if I looked at it long enough, she might come back in and somehow undo the whole conversation. My chest felt tight, like someone had wrapped a strap around it and pulled just hard enough to make breathing awkward, but not impossible. That strange, in-between pain. The kind that lingers. I kept hearing her last words in my head. Keep the money. At first it sounded like anger, pride, self-protection. But the more I thought about it, the more it seemed like something else. A line being drawn, a wall going up, and suddenly I was on the wrong side of it. When I eventually went back to my desk, I felt the shift immediately. You know when a room doesn't quite go silent when you walk in, but close enough that you notice? It was like that. Conversations got quieter. Eyes lifted, then dropped. People looked at me differently. Not openly hostile, not confrontational, just wary. Like I'd become someone unpredictable. And that hurt more than I expected it to. Because only a few days earlier, I'd been the one organizing something kind. People were thanking me, smiling at me, trusting me. Now it felt as though I'd somehow turned into the problem. I sat down, opened my laptop, and stared at the screen without really seeing it. Emails blurred together. Notifications appeared and disappeared. My hands rested on the keyboard, but I didn't type a thing. All I could think was one question. Had I just ruined everything? That afternoon, the group chat turned tense. Someone asked for an update on the money. A normal enough question. But the second I read it, My stomach dropped because I knew whatever I said next was going to push things one way or the other. I typed slowly. I'm still holding on to it for now. I think we should all be on the same page before deciding what to do. The typing bubbles appeared almost instantly. Then the messages came. So it's just not helping her now. I thought this had already been decided. This feels unfair. Each one landed like another small weight on my chest. I tried explaining again that I wasn't refusing, that I just wanted clarity, that it wasn't only my decision. But the more I explained, the worse it seemed to sound, because to them, it was simple. Someone needed help. We helped. That should have been the end of it, and I was the one making it complicated. One coworker, someone I'd always got on well with, finally said the part nobody else had quite said out loud. If you didn't trust her, you shouldn't have organized this in the first place. That one stayed with me, because it wasn't only criticism. It was disappointment, and I felt it deeply. I closed the chat after that. I couldn't bear it any longer. For the rest of the day, I just went through the motions. Nodded when people spoke to me, smiled when it was expected, pretended to concentrate on work, but inside, everything was loud. Doubt, guilt, frustration, all tangled together. Part of me kept thinking maybe I'd overreacted. Maybe I'd let a rumor get into my head. Maybe I should have just trusted her and left it alone. But another part of me kept pushing back. No, something didn't add up. Her hesitation, her vague answers, the way she reacted the moment I asked questions, and that look on her face when I mentioned the holiday. It didn't feel like the look of someone being wildly misunderstood. It felt like someone being caught off balance, and that thought wouldn't let me go. That night, I barely slept. I lay staring at the ceiling, my mind going round in circles, because this wasn't only about the money anymore. It was about trust and responsibility. That money didn't belong to me. People had handed it over because they believed it was going to help someone who genuinely needed it, and I was the one holding it, which meant I was the one responsible. If I gave it to her and something was wrong, that was on me. But if I refused and she truly was struggling, that was on me too. There wasn't a neat way out of it. The next morning, I made a decision. If this was all going to fall apart anyway, I needed to be certain. So I reached out to the coworker who'd first mentioned the holiday. We met before work at a small coffee place near the office. The smell of roasted coffee beans filled the air, but for once, it did nothing to settle me. I got straight to the point. Are you sure about what you heard? She hesitated, then nodded. I didn't want to get involved, she said. But yes, she talked about it more than once. Dates, places, details. It didn't sound vague. My stomach dropped all over again. Did she say when? She told me, and it lined up almost perfectly with the time Chloe had said she couldn't cover her rent. That wasn't just awkward timing. That was something else. I felt a cold wave pass through me. Not anger. Not even betrayal. Just clarity. And it was heavier than I expected, because now this wasn't just a vague suspicion. It was a choice. I could still ignore it, still hand over the money, still keep the peace. Or I could face what it might actually mean. That maybe the person we'd all rushed to help hadn't been completely honest, and that I had come dangerously close to handing over a sizable amount of other people's money without questioning it. I sat there, staring into my coffee, watching the surface tremble slightly because my hand wasn't steady. And I realized something. This wasn't about being kind anymore. It was about being right. And those two things don't always live in the same place. When I got to the office that morning, everything felt sharper, clear, as if some fog had finally lifted. I still didn't have absolute proof, but I knew one thing. I couldn't pretend I hadn't seen what I'd seen, even if it meant standing on my own. When I walked into the office that day, It felt like stepping into a place that looked exactly the same, but wasn't. Same desks, same low hum of computers, same stale office air, same murmur of conversations. But underneath all of it, something had shifted, and I knew, with a horrible sort of certainty, that things weren't going back to how they'd been. I sat down, put my bag beside my chair, and stared at my screen for a few seconds before I even switched my computer on. In the black reflection of the monitor, I could see my own face faintly. Tired eyes, clenched jaw, shoulders more rigid than usual. I took a slow breath. If I was going to do this, I had to do it properly. No more half measures, no more vague wording. So I opened the group chat. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a second, and I could feel that old hesitation rising again. That voice in the back of my mind whispering, "Are you sure?" No, I wasn't. But I typed anyway. "I think we need to speak openly about the collection before moving forward." The message sat there for a few seconds. Then the replies started. "What is there to speak about? Just give her the money. Why is this turning into a whole thing?" Each message felt sharper than the one before. But this time, I didn't retreat. "I've heard information that doesn't fully line up with what we were told," I wrote. "And because this is everyone's contribution, I think we should make any decision with full transparency." There it was, out in the open. No names, no direct accusation, but clear enough. The chat went quiet for a moment. Then, "What information? Are you implying something? If you've got something to say it." My heart started pounding harder. I could feel it in my throat, in my ears, like my own body was trying to force me to stop. But I didn't stop. "I've heard there may be plans for a holiday around the same time the financial issue was mentioned." The silence after that felt heavier than anything before, because now it wasn't just tension anymore. Now it was real. A few seconds passed, then a minute. And then, "That doesn't prove anything. She could have booked it before. You're making assumptions." The defensiveness came up immediately, and I expected that. What I didn't expect was how calm I felt reading it, because for the first time since this started, I wasn't only reacting emotionally, I was thinking clearly. "I'm not making a final judgment," I replied. "I'm saying we should confirm before giving the money." That was the point where everything tipped. Chloe replied, "I didn't think I'd have to defend myself like this." Seeing her name appear on the screen made my chest tighten all over again. But I forced myself to keep reading. "I trusted you all enough to share something personal. I didn't realize it would become an investigation." The wording was careful, controlled, and I could feel the group leaning towards her already, because she sounded wounded. She sounded like the victim. "I'm not accusing you," I replied. "I'm asking for clarity so everyone can feel comfortable." A few seconds passed. Then she wrote again. "So what exactly do you want from me?" That question. Simple. Direct. And suddenly I realized this was it. This was the moment everything was going to turn on, because whatever I asked for next would define the entire situation. I stared at the screen, mind racing. Proof, more details, an explanation. Every option sounded either too aggressive or too weak. And in the end, I typed the only thing that felt remotely fair. "I think it would help if you could clarify your situation and the timing of your plans so everyone understands." The message sent. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, "I don't owe anyone an explanation of my personal life." There it was. Clear. Final. And somehow that hit harder than anything else she'd said. Because it wasn't emotional. It wasn't defensive. It was just closed. A door shut firmly. And in that moment, everything became very simple. Not easy, but simple. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the screen while the silence in the chat stretched on. No one rushed to support me. No one asked further questions. And I could feel it again. That quiet shift. People were choosing sides. And I wasn't on the side most of them wanted to be on. I took a breath. Then I typed one final message. Since the situation can't be clarified, I'm not comfortable handing over the money without everyone being fully informed. I think we should either return the contributions or agree together on another way to use them. The second I sent it, I knew there was no going back. This wasn't hesitation anymore. This was a position, and positions come with consequences. The replies came more slowly after that, more cautious. Some people agreed, quietly and without enthusiasm. Others pushed back, saying it was unfair, that we were turning something simple into something ugly. But the biggest thing was this. No one could ignore it anymore. The doubt was there. And once doubt is in the room, it doesn't just vanish. It spreads. Later that day, I passed Chloe in the corridor. She didn't look at me, didn't say a word. She just walked past as if I wasn't there at all. And that hurt more than I expected. Because by then, it really wasn't about the money anymore. It was about trust. And whatever had existed between us before was gone. That evening I sat alone in my flat, the envelope of money on the table in front of me. It looked so small, so ordinary, and yet it carried so much weight. I stared at it for ages, thinking about everyone who'd contributed, thinking about why we'd done it, thinking about how something that began with kindness had somehow curdled into this. And I realized something that made my chest feel heavy all over again. There was no perfect ending to this. No version where everybody walked away feeling good. No clean resolution. Just choices and consequences. And now I had to live with mine. That night I barely slept again. I kept waking up, replaying everything in endless loops. Every conversation, every message, every glance across the office. It all kept piling up in my mind until it felt like I was being crushed under it. And the worst part, it wasn't only doubt anymore. It was isolation. By the next morning, it was obvious the office had split itself, quietly and unofficially, into two camps. Not loudly, not dramatically. Nobody was shouting in the middle of the room or making speeches about fairness, but you could feel it. In who sat with whom at lunch, in who stopped talking when I passed, in who still met my eyes, and who carefully avoided doing so. Some people kept their distance from me, like they didn't want to be pulled into whatever this had become. Others gave me small, almost apologetic nods, tiny signs that they understood, even if they didn't want to say so publicly. And then there were the ones who carried on, as if nothing at all had happened, which somehow felt worse, because it meant they were choosing to ignore it. Ignore me. Ignore the situation. Pretend it would all somehow sort itself out if nobody addressed it directly. But it didn't. It couldn't. Because the envelope was still in my bag, and it felt heavier every time I carried it into that office. Around midday, one of the coworkers who'd stayed mostly neutral came over to me. She sat down beside me quietly, glanced around to make sure nobody was really listening, and then said in a low voice, "I think this has gone too far." I didn't answer immediately, not because I had nothing to say, but because I didn't know which version of too far she meant. Too far in which direction? "You haven't done anything wrong," she added gently. "But people are uncomfortable now. They hate conflict." I let out a slow breath and stared at my hands. "I didn't want conflict," I said. "I know," she replied. "But sometimes doing the right thing causes it anyway." That sentence stayed with me because somewhere deep down, I think I already knew it was true. Later that afternoon, a few of us ended up having a proper conversation about the money. Not in the group chat, not hidden behind screens, face to face, and it was tense. Not explosive, but dense. Heavy, like every sentence had to be chosen carefully, or it might tip the whole thing over. Some people argued that the money should still go to Chloe. She hasn't admitted to lying. There's no actual proof. We can't punish someone based on gossip. Others, fewer people but more certain, said we needed to be careful. It isn't a tiny amount. It's not just about emotions. If something doesn't add up, we can't just ignore it because it's awkward. I listened more than I spoke, because by that point, I didn't feel like I had the right to control the result anymore. I'd already done that once by deciding to hold on to the money, and look what that had become. So I let them talk. Let them disagree. Let them carry some of the confusion I've been holding on my own. And strangely enough, it helped. Because for the first time, the doubt wasn't mine alone. It belonged to the room. Eventually, we arrived at something that wasn't really a solution, but it was the closest thing we were going to get. We agreed not to hand the money directly to Chloe. Instead, we would offer to help in a more controlled way. Pay rent straight to the landlord if needed, or cover specific bills if there was proof. It wasn't neat, it wasn't ideal, but it felt fair, or as fair as a situation like that could possibly feel. When we put the idea to her later that day, I could sense the tension before she even spoke. She listened quietly, didn't interrupt, didn't react, and for one brief second I thought maybe this might actually work. Maybe there was still some way to repair at least part of what had been broken. But then she shook her head. No, she said. Just that one word. Simple. Flat. Firm. I'm not going to prove my circumstances to anyone, she said. If you don't trust me, that's your choice. Her eyes flicked to me for the briefest moment, and in that second, I felt it again. That clean, silent break between us. I don't want the money, she finished, and that was it. No shouting, no tears, no dramatic scene, just distance. She walked away, and this time, nobody tried to stop her. The silence afterwards felt different from the silences that had come before. Not tense, not uncertain, just settled, as if something had finally ended. In the days that followed, things gradually calmed down. Not back to normal. I don't think it ever really can go back to normal after something like that, but quieter, more stable. The money was eventually returned to everyone who had contributed. Some people chose to donate their share somewhere else. Others simply took it back. And me, I kept replaying the whole thing again and again, trying to figure out whether I would do anything differently if I had the chance. Whether I should have trusted her, whether I should have kept quiet, whether I should have just handed it over and let it stop being my problem. But every time I followed the story back to the beginning, I ended up in the same place. That feeling, that moment when something didn't add up, and I chose not to look away from it. I lost things because of that, maybe more than one thing. The easy atmosphere at work, whatever trust Chloe had in me, the simpler version of myself, who didn't yet understand how ugly doing the responsible thing can feel. But I also learned something I never expected to learn in a situation like this. Doing the right thing doesn't always feel righteous. Sometimes it feels lonely, uncomfortable, heavy. And sometimes it makes you look like the worst person in somebody else's version of the story. I'm still trying to work out whether I'd make the same choice again if I had to do it all over. Maybe I would. Maybe I wouldn't. But if you'd been in my position, holding that envelope, hearing those doubts, feeling that shift in your gut, what would you have done? And if you want to hear more stories like this, stay with me.